think we're good to go. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us on today's session of human trafficking. Today we have Sarah Johnston and Rati presenting on human trafficking and also labor trafficking. Today's session is scheduled till 3 o'clock. We're going to save questions for the end of the presentation. Again, like always, if you can please keep your microphones and your videos off during today's presentation, that would be great. And if you need a certificate of participation, please email Marilyn at the end of today's presentation, and she will get that sent out to you. So with that, I will turn it over to Sarah and Rati.
All right, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Everything has worked so far, so let's find out if it still does. All right, do you see that?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. I cannot see myself, but we'll just go with that. So hi, everyone. My name is Sarah. I am the Central Navigator for the North Dakota Human Trafficking Task Force. And I'm very excited to present today. I work with numerous people across the state. But today I brought on our labor trafficking specialist, Rati. So I'll let him kind of introduce himself right now.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. I'm Rati Matsika. I'm the labor trafficking specialist for the entire state of North Dakota for both adults and youth. So before I got to join the North Dakota Human Task Force, I also worked as a diplomat, which is foreign service officer for almost 15 years. And I'm a father of 4 daughters. I live here in North Dakota, Dickinson. So a little bit of that. I also served a little bit with the North Dakota Department of Labor and Human Rights as a compliance specialist. So this is a little bit of me. We can talk more if we have time, but not for today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rati. So there we go. Now I can see myself. So yes, I just want to do a little disclaimer for everybody. Sometimes this can be some rough material. So if you're feeling triggered or traumatized by any of it, please get up, get a drink of water, pet your dog if you're at home. And then we're also going to be sharing some statistics today. Keep in mind that statistics are only as good as what is reported, and all that we are sharing are our group statistics, so from our team and what is reported in North Dakota. So it's not a full picture, but it's a glimpse into what happens in our state. All right, now where did my mouse go? Disappeared. Give me 1 second, sorry. We have some technical difficulties. All right, so we're going to start with just talking about who we are as a task force and what we do. Many of you probably have not heard of us before, so we'll give you a little glimpse into what our team does for this state. So our mission is the North Dakota Human Trafficking Task Force is a statewide multidisciplinary collaboration of law enforcement, service providers, and prosecution, established to work in a victim-centered manner to prevent, detect, disrupt, and dismantle human trafficking through coordinated, comprehensive services and efficient investigation and prosecution. So just keep that in mind. Working through that, we have a team that works with sex and labor trafficking. And with those services that we provide, we have 3 human trafficking navigators, one on the east, west, and then me in the center. And we bridge that gap between service providers, victims, and survivors, and law enforcement and prosecution, as well as building the capacity in the communities to respond on their own, but as well as we kind of bring everybody to the table. We have a website. This is just kind of an example of what it looks like. And that's our QR code if you're ever needing to report a tip that happens in North Dakota. It's completely anonymous. We do investigate every tip that is put in, regardless of how big or small it may seem. And if it involves names, we keep a list. It gets sent on to a statewide information kind of management system. So we were established in 2015 under the Federal Enhanced Collaborative Model Grant, and we work out of the Attorney General's office. And like I said before, we're focusing on that direct response to victims. So what that looks like in our state is we create multidisciplinary teams that has law enforcement, service providers, prosecution. We kind of invite anybody that can help or learn to be a part of that. We offer training across the state. We provide support to survivors. Our team specifically, we have iPads for telehealth. We have cell phones in case of survivors' cell phone is being investigated. And we have funds that can reimburse other service providers for specific things. We offer technical support to law enforcement and service providers, which includes education. We help search for services and connect with other service providers. Since we're across the state, it's kind of unique. We get to help if a victim or a survivor would like to move to a different part. We have people all over to help with those services. So they can be anything from clothing and food, transportation and housing. And we also work with the case managers and help them coordinate services maybe that are a little beyond their scope. We help locate those things within different communities. And as we know, we're a little rural. I love that about North Dakota. I consider us one big city with all of our little suburbs. So this just helps us connect with each other and find those services that may not be in a local small town area, but we can bring them some of our rural telehealth services. So our specific needs for health within the last, since October 1st to December of 2021, we have helped with mental health services, dental, life skills, transportation. And as you see, there's housing. Housing is a key part of what a victim and a survivor needs, as well as something that we help provide. Do you have anything else you'd like to add to that, Rati?
Nothing yet. Thanks for delivering that.
Thank you. So this is kind of, I think we all have an idea of what trafficking can look like. And within our state, it probably looks a little different than what you've currently thought of. I did a quick Google search to kind of see what pops up, and instantly what we see are those physical chains. I think we kind of have this image of people being sold on a corner. Though these things can happen, they are not always indicative of what is happening. So we kind of, right, we imagine that van driving up and a shadowy figure jumping out and kidnapping a child or an adult. We see a lot on social media with different signals being left out. And that's not to say that that does not happen. It's not to say that that isn't something that can happen, but we often think of the movie Taken, right? You know, like, I will come, I will find you. But the reality is, it looks like labor disputes, prostitution, it can be pornography. It comes across in a lot of different ways. In North Dakota, we see familial trafficking. So where a family member is involved with trading their child or their spouse or their parent, either in labor trafficking or sex trafficking for something of value. And as you can see, with that kind of myth that we have is a thought that people are brought into our state, but the reality of who we serve more, we do serve non-residents, but we do have a big chunk of North Dakota residents that we do serve. So yes, some people are moving, but we have people within our state. So with that, there's sometimes a question of why does trafficking happen in smaller areas? It might be easier, or in our thoughts, we might think it's easier in a bigger city to stay hidden, to move people. Well, the fact of the matter is, as Scott Santoro from Homeland Security said, is it's easier to work underground. You can keep a lot more things secret in our large, vast areas with less law enforcement per square mile. They know how to use their work freely here. And as this is an example on our map, so everywhere there's a red dot, that's where we have a multidisciplinary team located. We have law enforcement, prosecutors, and service providers that come together. But everywhere you see a gray star, that is where we have had a report of human trafficking or have helped a victim of human trafficking. So for me, I'm from the down in the southeastern corner, and I can see quite a few gray stars. So that kind of hits close to home and makes you kind of understand that it's not just happening in Fargo or Bismarck or up in Williston, it's happening in those small towns. So today, like was mentioned, we're going to be talking about two separate categories. One being labor trafficking. I'm so excited to have Rati, our labor trafficking specialist. He's going to go into some detail about that. Might be something that you haven't considered before. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our sex trafficking that happens here. This is the side-by-side comparison. As you'll notice, the big key is force, fraud, or coercion. And then these are some instances that it can take place, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Again, to reiterate, stats are only as good as what is reported. So we have served more sex trafficking victims than labor trafficking victims. However, this is sometimes where you guys can come into play, right? If you know what to identify, we often almost, I would say, before I had this position, would think of sex trafficking as human trafficking, whereas labor trafficking happens within our visual spectrum, right? We see that more in the legal system, whereas you're not necessarily going to see someone pulling someone into a back room for sex trafficking. So with that, we'll go into labor trafficking, and Rati is going to take us away.
Thanks, Sarah. And again, hi, everybody. It's my pleasure to present to you something that I believe you may want to know, or you may need to know about labor trafficking. And I think I have to just go back to the statistics that Sarah just talked about. This is so intentional in terms of starting with labor trafficking. Sarah started with this issue of saying sex trafficking has got 84% and labor trafficking has got something like 6%, and then 9% is a combination of both sex and labor trafficking. So why do I want to have this conversation today? It is simply because I believe a lot of conversations statewide or nationally, or even on the international plane, focuses more on issues of sex trafficking. It is something that has been glamorized as if we do not have victims of labor trafficking. So this is so intentional. Let us have this conversation so that probably at the end, you'll be able to say something about labor trafficking or to know what it is. So in terms of definition, why it is important for us to define it is because it is somehow different from sex trafficking, because this is defined as some kind of use of force, fraud, and coercion to compel someone to work for you or for the purpose of some kind of a gain or profits. Why is somebody doing that? To say we need to have force, fraud, and coercion. It is understood that here in North Dakota, there is always an issue of young people that are allowed to work. And if we have the youth that are allowed to work, I could say even nationally, youth are allowed to work. There's youth employment. If youth employment is allowed, so we have to make sure that if someone is working as a youth or someone who is under the age of legal majority is allowed to work, we have to prove that the person has been is working because has been subject to force, fraud, or coercion for it to be labor trafficking. This is unlike sex trafficking, because in sex trafficking, generally, we don't have to think of force, fraud, and coercion when we are talking of kids. it's not necessary to prove force, fraud, and coercion. So I want to emphasize that aspect. I don't have time for us to talk or to define exactly what force, fraud, and coercion is, because that is probably something that can take a whole hour or more. But we look at the issue of trafficking as the act, the means, and purpose. Those are the three critical elements of labor trafficking that we look at. For when we are talking of acts, we introduce the issue of harboring, recruitment, transporting somebody. Well, how do we recruit somebody? You may use force, you may use restraints, and generally they say means any scheme or plan that has been used to get somebody to work for you without consent. So for the purpose is simply to benefit the trafficker, not the victim. So it's something that is really broadly defined by the federal legislation. But in terms of North Dakota, probably you may want to know. In North Dakota, it's a little bit different because they focus on forced labor. And see, here is this Venn diagram. Why do I love this Venn diagram? This Venn diagram is something.
Can we have everybody mute their microphones, please? It looks like there's someone on the phone that's not muted. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you for that. Yes, so we want to talk about this because there is usually a misconception that everybody who is subjected to some form of labor exploitation is a victim of labor trafficking, which is not the case. So we want to try to delineate issues of child labor that we talked about, to say if somebody is allowed to work, then there is not child labor by law. But if somebody is not authorized to work, and even if there is no force, fraud, or coercion, it's simply child labor. It's not labor trafficking. So labor exploitation and labor trafficking, there is just that intersection. If you look at that diagram, you can see there are areas where those 2 or 3 intersect for you to understand. But essentially, there is need for us to have aspect of force, fraud, and coercion to us to have issues of labor trafficking. So any violation, one can be, of course, denied wages, but if there is a recourse for that person to say report to the North Dakota Department of Labor and Human Rights for investigation, and that person is that recourse and is allowed to do that, it cannot be treated as labor trafficking. But if that person is no recourse to some kind of legal redress, essentially, then we may say that person is under some form of labor trafficking. Is threatened by some means to say, if you report to the Department of Labor and Human Rights or the Federal Department of Labor, we are going to get you deported if that person is a foreign national, or some family members are threatened by some kind of physical violence, then that becomes labor trafficking because there is coercion there or force. We can go to the next slide then. Right, another container which shows, again, the definition of labor exploitation and labor trafficking being contrasted. Even, like I said, somebody is promised a pay. If that pay is not delivered, it may not be labor trafficking per se. There could be other reasons. But if that has been achieved through means of what, diminishing resistance of the victim or intimidating the victim through control or deception or some means, use of the law to threaten the victim to say, if I do not give you what you deserve, what we agreed on, if I withhold your wages, then if you report, I'm getting you deported, like I said, or you're physically violated or physically beaten or assaulted, then it becomes labor trafficking. It changed from labor exploitation to labor trafficking. Those are the essential elements that we can talk about. And so we can go to the next slide a little bit. If you have any question, please feel free to ask later. We can expand on those issues. Okay, in terms of Polaris Project, which is one national organization or nonprofit which researches deeply on these issues of labor trafficking, they looked at settings or what we call or industries where we can find labor trafficking. It has been discovered that in terms of the calls that they received, labor trafficking takes place or happens in 19 out of the 25 settings. So I do not know where each one of the participants belong. You may be belonging to the construction industry, you may be belonging to some kind of arts entertainment. I'm not quite sure, but as long as you belong to any one of these or even more, the chances are labor trafficking could be happening or taking place in your setting, because we say 19 out of 25. It doesn't necessarily mean to say in those other settings that are left out, about 6 of them, it doesn't take place. It might be going on, it's just that it has not been reported in terms of the calls that they received. So we go to the indicators. Here, when we are talking of indicators, the indicators of labor trafficking, they really overlap. We cannot say they happen if somebody just doesn't receive his or her wages. We cannot immediately say, okay, that's the only indicator which points to the person being a victim of labor trafficking. They can be a multiple of those indicators going on, but we find them in the working and living conditions of those victims. We also look at the lack of control. If somebody cannot control their identification documents, if they cannot speak for themselves, then they're being controlled. So that control is a form of coercion. If we want to look at the legal definition of coercion in terms of defining labor trafficking, that lack of control, if somebody's controlling an individual, somebody's denying somebody to have control of the documents, if somebody doesn't like somebody to control their own money or personal possessions, then it's labor trafficking. But if the person has got a recourse to say, okay, my documents are here, I can remove these documents and get some more documents, then it ceases to be labor trafficking. It becomes labor trafficking if all those elements of lack of control and the living and working conditions are being denied, and somebody has no way of saying no to that and finding a legal recourse, then it becomes labor trafficking. Okay, so we can move on to other elements here. There is always this aspect you will see that we always say, if you have done research, we always say anyone can be a victim of labor trafficking or anyone can be a trafficker. In terms of being a victim of trafficking, I think that's early research to say anyone can be, but there must be some kind of risk factors or certain vulnerabilities that exposes or that makes somebody a victim of labor trafficking or even sex trafficking. For instance, if someone becomes homeless, somebody doesn't have some kind of social protection, they certainly become victims of trafficking. It's easier for them to be targets. If somebody has some kind of mental illness, then it becomes easy. If somebody is a runaway child, honestly, they are easier targets. If somebody is undocumented, they look for any kind of job. And if they got that kind of job, certainly, if the employer knows, it's easier for those people to be victims of labor trafficking. Those are the kind of risk factors that we look at, certain vulnerabilities. They make them vulnerable to some kind of exploitation. So we can move to the next slide. I think it's more or less the same. We are talking of the kind of vulnerabilities that make those people really kind of victims or exposed to some kind of labor trafficking. So we are not going to dwell much on that, but we see the issues. Like I said, who can be a trafficker or who can be trafficked? I said evidence shows that anyone can be trafficked, but then those risk factors or vulnerabilities that we just explained above are very important for us to bear in mind. It's early research when we just looked at the victims of or survivors of trafficking in the US pointed to probably that anybody could be a victim, but later research indicated that those people must have some kind of vulnerabilities or risks, like they are poor, they don't have anything, they're expecting somebody says, okay, I want to take you from Honduras, Mexico, Republic of Zimbabwe, South Africa to go and work into the US because somebody is poor. Their expectation is that moving to the US is going to transform their lives and their families, and nobody can resist that kind of American dream. And when they arrive here, there is a switch from the promises that you were given. You are now exposed to some kind of exploitation. The wages that were promised are now being denied. The documents that you had when you traveled are now detained by somebody. You have no recourse. That's why we say it's modern day slavery. It's not as explicit as obvious as it used to be. People can be fraudulent. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so who can be your trafficker? I say case law provides evidence that anyone can be your trafficker, a prince or a villain. When I'm saying a prince or a villain, I mean to say if we have, I said I lived for some time as a diplomat. I've seen cases which involved representatives of heads of states based in New York and Washington, DC, being involved as traffickers. They bring in maids from their countries or domestic servants from their countries. And then when they arrive here, those people are not given what they were promised. When they are not given what they are promised, those people have no recourse because their visa is tied to the employer. What happens then? That person continues to work without being given what they are promised. So we have so many cases that are really, that came through the courts, the courts of the United States, and they are showing that anyone can be a trafficker, even a villain. Someone whom you know to be a criminal by nature can also, I know one of the princes of Saudi Arabia was involved in a number of cases in Florida of trafficking. I'm giving examples that are outside North Dakota. That doesn't mean to say we don't have such cases in North Dakota, but this is the reason why we're having this kind of conversation, to say anybody can be a victim and yet anybody can also be a trafficker. Sarah indicated that traffickers would love to live in those rural areas or areas where they cannot easily be detected, because it's easier for those people to be in hiding because it happens in plain sight. Next, please. If I'm too fast, please, Sarah, just say, hold on. Okay, so
that was my fault. It didn't want to click right away, but we got it.
Okay, no problem. So we talked about the risks of vulnerabilities, but we also know that we can do something about labor trafficking. We have to make sure that there are certain protective factors that makes people less risky. There are certain individual factors that we need to improve. Generally, I should say, we have to improve on those protective factors and lower the risk factors to make sure that people don't get subjected to some kind of labor trafficking. If we increase the protective factors, we look at the personal characteristics. What is it that we are talking about? We look at somebody's situation in terms of employment, how employable somebody is, their education, all those things, the personal experience, their behavior. We try to improve on them. Through interaction, we look at the relationships, how protective our families. I always say I'm a father of daughters, and see, as a father of daughters, I'm so jealous. I try to make sure that the most protective environment for my kids begins with me and my wife here at home. We have to make sure that we deliver on what is important. How do we educate them to be careful about the world out there? So that's very important. Broken families lead to runaway kids, and runaway kids end up probably being in some kind of exploitative situations. You will see, if you continue to research in this area or to attend certain classes, if you have opportunity, you will get to know more cases where victims of that kind of trafficking or labor trafficking come from families that are broken. That's why relationships are important, to create some kind of protective environments for those people, to make sure that they don't get victims. Okay, community and environmental factors. We need to make sure that our communities become protective environments. The neighborhood that we live in, it is important to be a good neighbor. Really, there is a lot that you can do as an individual, but yet there is a lot that we can do collectively together as a community to make sure that those traffickers are identified. Because I know sometimes it takes you as a neighbor to just talk to someone who looks so somber as a maid in someone's homestead. You are the person who is closer to your neighbor, and you can probably identify somebody who only comes out to pick mail from the mailbox. And see, besides that, they are not seen anywhere. So it's possibly easier for you to question. I know it's not always easy, but sometimes you can figure something. If you suspect something is not good, probably it's good to alert some law enforcement or even some service providers who can just try to investigate what could be going on. This is normally the case with labor trafficking. It's not identified by law enforcement by and large. It's the members of the community that are important to identify labor trafficking. And then we are also going to talk about societal factors. When we're talking societal factors, we are talking about the law. Is the law sufficient? We are not lobbyists as the task force, but you members of the community, honestly, members, you can even talk to your legislators to look at the kind of the legal framework and see if it is sufficient to address the issues that we are seeing, the gaps that we are seeing in terms of protecting victims of trafficking. Let's look at another one. Yes, I think we have obvious cases. That's why we are saying it's a complicated matter, but we may have obvious cases where someone is recruited from the Republic of Badia. I always want to refer to a country called the Badia, which does not exist because I may refer to somebody's country. And he recruited to work in the US, transported from that country, and never allowed to leave the factory. We work continuously, is not paid. This is an obvious case of trafficking, right? But there are other cases that are so difficult to talk about. I can give you a good example, which happened recently in Idaho. It's very tricky. 6 veterinarians, those are people who are educated with great and prestigious university degrees. They are hired under TN visa. And when they arrived here, the visa was switched. Why I'm saying the visa was switched, it was not changed in actual fact, but they were not allowed to work as professional veterinarians. They were asked to milk cows. And they were not paid what they were supposed to be paid. Some got injured, breaking their fingers, and they were not allowed to see medical doctors. So those are cases that are very difficult if you don't look into the nitty-gritties of the real case. So just some kind of example which is not so obvious. And next slide, if we can move. Okay, so if you look at this series of or continuum of recruitment of foreign labor, you see that somebody is, like I said, lives in some Republic of Badia. They are told through social media or through friends that there's some kind of work somewhere where they would get really their life transformed. That's where the issue of fraud and coercion takes place, because the person is actually coached on what to say when they are going for the interview at the embassy of the United States of America in the Republic of Badia to get for the visa. So if they are coached by the recruiter or that trafficker, the embassy wouldn't know. This is where the issue of fraud comes in. Embassy officials wouldn't know. I have an experience as an embassy official. We wouldn't know some of these things. You only get to know probably when the case comes out of, oh, this was kind of suspicious, by the way, this person was behaving this way. But otherwise, without this kind of education, we won't be able to tell. And the person moves. So along the entire continuum, from being in the home country, there's a lot that takes place. That's where fraud can take place. Sometimes coercion takes place. Some enticement goes on there, and the movement goes. So where do I put this across? I'm putting this across because I want us to understand that it is not true. It is a myth to say victims of trafficking were smuggled into the United States of America or any other country for that matter. It is not true. To say they are undocumented. They could be very well documented, arrived in the US with a very legal visa, due process was done. But at the end of the day, you find when they arrive here, the actual trafficking takes place. So they are not victims because they are stupid, if you may want to use that word, or if because they are here illegally, but they were subject to some form of force, fraud, or coercion. That's why we want to talk about this. We can move to the next slide. Okay, I just had to post a little bit of some type of visas that we find in those people coming to the US. An H-2A visa for people who are here to work in agriculture, they are seasonal. And the most difficult thing for people to detect is you cannot go to any farm and say, we want to know the status or the kind of visa that this person came by. It's not easy to do that. It takes kind of advocacy or education. You have a conversation with somebody who is working in that farm to just get to know that there is an issue called labor trafficking that can lighten them up, that can awaken them to get to understand that, okay, what they're experiencing is some kind of labor trafficking. Why is this visa difficult? This visa include the H-2B, G5, and H-3 visa. They are difficult because they tie the victim or that worker to one employer, and they have it's not easy for them to just change employers. It's different from you and I who can say, okay, I don't feel good with this employer, I can change my job. So this exposes those people to some kind of exploitation in the form of labor trafficking. So these are just examples. We also have other examples like the J1. We can talk of so many, but these are just examples that you can make reference to in your research. You want to know more about labor trafficking and the kind of visas that are abused by traffickers. I should say they are abused by traffickers. They game the system. So, okay, what are our findings in North Dakota? Like Sarah said, this is not conclusive. You can say that this is the data we pulled from 2016 to March 31, 2021. We have updated statistics, but you can see the kind of settings that we found labor trafficking taking place. Even in a private home, you can see. That's why it is important, even as a landlord, it is important to look at the agreements, the lease agreement that you are going to have with somebody, because it's very important to know who is in your house, who has checked into your house. It is very critical to just tick the box, to do background check. Is everybody really belonging to that family, or there's somebody who was smuggled? This is why it is important to get to know who is in somebody's backyard. It's not just that. It is very important for you also to know that, okay, in construction industry, there's a lot of trafficking that takes place there. I know it is very difficult to say, okay, you see somebody who is modeling a roof or modeling a house. You can't immediately say, okay, that person must be a victim of trafficking. Even the landlord himself, the owner of the house, is focused on getting that house completed. That's why it is somehow difficult for us to figure out what's going on. Or is this person a victim of trafficking? It takes a lot of conversations. That's why we need everybody on the deck. Let's all have that kind of conversation. Okay. Okay, we are seeing this is happening in North Dakota. What type of exploitation the client experienced? We see there's domestic servitude, something to do with landscaping, child care. There's just too much that we can talk about, but these are just examples that we see. And so what else can we say, Sarah, later? You have anything, Sarah, to add?
I think you're covering it. If you're confused right now, that is okay. It can be a confusing subject, and we do not expect any of you to be experts. That's why we're kind of giving you that background and that understanding. And we're laying a framework of what to look for, and then later we'll kind of adjust to what is specific in your guys' realm.
Thanks, Sarah. Next one. Okay, so we talked about the settings and the types of exploitation or labor trafficking that takes place in certain industries or certain places in North Dakota. We look at the demographics. That's why we find female, there's 68%, male 32%, transgender we haven't found yet, so at least for now. But why is it difficult to find certain demographics? It is simply because there are barriers that are related to individuals, or there are certain barriers that are related to the system or service provider. Some people do not come out because, or we don't identify people because individuals lack awareness of victimization. They do not even know or believe that they are victims of trafficking. They believe that probably they owe somebody a date and they must work off that date. So if you lack identification documents or records, sometimes you fear coming out because somebody tells you, okay, I'm undocumented. Then if I come out, I'll be deported or law enforcement will be against me. So those are some of the issues that we find really. Sometimes they feel that they're in complicity with an illegal act. You know, I've had conversations with some friends in the law enforcement saying, okay, these are really partners in crime. So if you hear somebody saying that in the law enforcement, what more of the victim himself? Then this is the importance of having this kind of a conversation. The false fraud elements are there. Sometimes it takes me as a provider or lacking the kind of knowledge about that labor trafficking. This is why we are having this conversation. If you are a landlord, if you are a realtor, it is very important to just have this kind of a case conversation so that you get to know certain indicators.
Yeah, she came like right as I was leaving.
Yeah, it is very
She had
important
a meeting.
to have this kind of conversation. And sometimes we don't do that because we are not really trauma-informed training. It's very important to be trauma-informed training because you have a conversation with a survivor. It's not easy. I had one meeting that I finished a while ago before I jumped into this training.
I was pulling in here and now he's coming back riding bike.
It's not easy to really just pay attention to those issues if you are not really trained, if you are not sensitive enough, because some of them can even traumatize you. So we have to make sure that we are not biased against the victim, to blame victims. So why do we have this conversation? Is because we need everyone on the deck to have this conversation or to identify victims of labor trafficking. We need everybody, from the church to individuals, organizations, non-profits, communities, professionals, universities. Okay, I would ask somebody from the University of State University of Minot to say, okay, do we have a program on labor trafficking? Just to teach students from that age. Just say, okay, that's a random question. Okay, we need government, with law enforcement and everybody on the deck for us to be able to identify labor trafficking. I know I'm a little bit fast and my accent is different, but feel free to ask whatever you did not comprehend. So that's next. Is there anything? Okay, let's define sex trafficking with Sarah.
All right. Thank you, Rati. I get something new every time I listen to you talking about labor trafficking. I think it's very interesting, just like how it can take place in the legal realm. And then we're trying to find those differences to try to help people. So sex trafficking obviously is not something that you're necessarily going to see happening on the street, but somebody may talk to you about it. So what is that exploitation? It's when anyone is sold, traded, objectified for sex in exchange for something of value. It can be children or adults. So then trafficking, it kind of looks different. For when it's sex trafficking, it looks different for a juvenile or an adult. For an adult, you have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. But for a child or someone under the age of 18, that is just a commercial sex act. So if you are paying someone that is under 18 to have sex with you, that is human trafficking. If you are, you take pictures of someone that's under 18 and ready to post it and get paid online, and you tell them that they can't have a place to sleep if they don't post those photos, that is trafficking. And anything of value. So it could be a piece of candy to drugs or money. According to federal law, any minor that's introduced into the commercial sex industry has been trafficked. Like I said, there is no such thing as a child prostitute, and that is now federally across the board. So if there is a child on the street selling sex, if there is a juvenile trading sex for a place to live, that is trafficking. And kind of how Rati had mentioned, people aren't always aware that they're in a trafficking situation, right? Most people, I mean, if you're a victim, you don't want to always admit that you're a victim of a crime, but it is different in these situations because that trauma bond is so strong. You might have heard it as like Stockholm syndrome. That might make a little more sense to you in that sense. But you are so connected to this person emotionally, physically, verbally. They have come in with that power and control, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. Just something to reiterate, it can be anyone's daughter, son, niece, nephew, cousin, or a neighbor, including any of yours. And that's something that hits home all the time to me as I think of how I grew up. And there were definitely instances where my family struggled and my parents could have made one different decision and I could have easily been trafficked. And I thank God that they did not make that decision, but I can understand how some parents can be put in that situation. So when we talked about those vulnerabilities, they all, to me, fall under these four. You need love, wanting income, want a romantic relationship, or want to better their circumstances. I think we all can relate to that, at least at some point of our life. So following that, that means that anybody could be vulnerable and any trafficker could find that vulnerability and use it. So survived by gender in North Dakota, we've had 94% female, 4% male, and 2% transgender. One of the indicators with that could be that many men do not come forward, and the fact that services aren't always available or geared towards men, as well as screening tools aren't always. So we're working on getting those changed and kind of changing that mentality that both men and women can be victims. Again, anybody can be a victim or survivor. As you can see, who we have helped in North Dakota, it's not just minorities, but we've helped a lot of Caucasian people as well. So what happens? There's that misidentification of victims, right? Minors don't want to share, or they don't know that they're in that. Being mislabeled as a slut or a prostitute, being promiscuous, being involved in a gang, people thinking it only happens in other countries. And like I said, thinking that victims are only female. Another instance can be vulnerable adults. And again, not recognizing that that exploitation is happening, being afraid of retaliation, could be dependent on the perpetrator. It could be an elderly adult being trafficked by their child, forced to work within the home without receiving their money, their documents being withheld. It could be someone that is not neurotypical. Our world is created for neurotypical individuals, and those that are not often find that that trafficker can be their connection to the normal world. That kind of gives them a little bit of normality, so to speak. And then again, the elderly being afraid of being placed in a facility or long-term placement. Okay, so we have that idea of why don't people just run away from the situations that they're in? Obviously, not all of these are good situations, but again, feeling that shame, distrusting law enforcement. As sad as it is, law enforcement can be a trafficker as well. That has happened. It can be pastors. It can be literally anyone in a community. They use emotional manipulation. They prey on that need for love and affection, and they are the ones that are providing those basic needs. So for you, we've looked at some identification factors. And again, trafficking is so hard to see. We do not expect you to be experts. And just because you see these things doesn't necessarily indicate trafficking, but that's why you have us. We'll give you our contact information. We also have a hotline that you can put tips in if you're seeing any of these things. And again, gut feeling. If you're having a feeling something is off, more than likely something is off. So if you have a dwelling that has too many people, there's unusual amount of traffic. If you're doing a walkthrough and there's locks on the interior of doors, or locks, interior locks on doors and windows to keep people in. Those are definitely things to look at. And then again, if you have a group of people that are being picked up and taken somewhere else about the same time each day, that can be an indicator as well. And when you're talking to people, are their conversations seeming scripted or rehearsed? This isn't just indicative of trafficking. This can be many victims of crimes. So something to keep in mind when you're creating your spaces. Is someone unusually anxious if you mention law enforcement? Are they fearful? Is there an adult that doesn't appear to be able to drive themselves anywhere? Is someone speaking for an adult that's at that place? And if you have someone that is signing up to live in your apartment, do they have access to their personal documents, or is someone keeping those away from them? If you're a realtor, things to look at is if there's an open house that has an unusually significant amount of traffic and people moving in and out. That can be an example. If there's a seller that demands to be present during all of the showings and refuses to let a real estate agent be alone. And if you're going to open houses and school-age children are home when it's empty, or they're home during that open house when they should be at school, those can be examples. Again, if you're a realtor and you're walking through a house and you see those locks that are on the interior, those can be an example that someone previously has been involved in it. So again, something worth note, you can put it in our tip line. We do investigate all, well, Rati and I don't investigate all of those, but our BCI agents do look into every tip that gets sent to them. Rati, do you have anything you want to add to the identification?
You're still on points. Let's go.
Did you say you're good?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Again, just to reiterate how traffickers work is they find that vulnerability or that core need that is unmet, and they give a promise. It may not always start as a false promise. They may say, I love you, come in, I will take care of you. But then that promise turns false because their love is dependent, or their promise is dependent upon what the victim can give them. So I promise you shelter, you can come live with me, it's a safe place. And then that turns into, if you want to keep the shelter, I need you to have sex with 3 people tomorrow night. And if you don't, you're going to go live on the street. So again, our perpetrators, it's about that power and control model that they have. They're looking for those control techniques. It can look like anything from keeping someone isolated. It can be sexual abuse, physical abuse. It can be the emotional abuse, denying, blaming, and minimizing. This is for sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And this is pulled directly from Polaris, which is a national, international research and resource website that anybody can go to, and they do a lot of work. This, again, intersectionality between labor trafficking and sex trafficking, both can happen in the same realm. So like we kind of had looked at before, what are the settings that trafficking has occurred? Sex trafficking occurs frequently in private homes, motels, hotels, but as you can see, it has happened on the street parking lots. We've had it happen agriculturally and at bus stops and truck stops. So I have a video just to kind of say, why are we sharing this with you guys, right? Why is this important? Not only as citizens, because we can see this beyond just our career choices or being landlords or property managers, but this is a video that shares the story of some survivors that have lived through it and through their perspective. And I'm hoping that it works because it's been working. So bear with me 1 second while I get it situated here. All right, and you have to let me know if you can hear it. Rati, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear it? And then if you can't, we'll have to switch a setting.
I did a lot of walking on a reservation. back roads, dirt roads, all hours of the night. If I were to fall asleep somewhere, that would scare me.
What I did, I had this grandiose idea that if I sold my body enough, I could save some money. And I chased that illusion. I wasn't more worried about what I had to do to get there. I just wanted the goal, and the goal was to get the money so I can get the apartment, so I can get my son back.
Men I met that would say I could stay with them, but like there was no sleeping. Sex was always on the top of their minds. It was never free, nothing. It was just tiresome all the time, you know, nowhere to go.
I needed a place to stay anyway because I was on the street. It was him and his 2 sons, and they all had weapons, so we couldn't leave, we couldn't go anywhere. From there, he just took us on the track. I never saved a penny. It wasn't because I didn't work hard. It wasn't because I didn't go to work every day. I went to jail a lot. I got 3 years parole, and it lasted for 8 years. Because every time I got out, I needed an apartment, right? So I tried to do it again, and I'd go back. And every time I got out, I needed an apartment again. And it just was this revolving friggin' door. So I was homeless back then, and I'm homeless now. I'm in a shelter right now. I done filled out 40 applications for housing, and no one answered me because of my background.
I didn't know how to work. I had a criminal history already. I really couldn't function from day to day like how some people do. I had a lot of depression. And so I was still turning dates. It's hard to function in this world that doesn't understand me. This housing program wants me to do this chore like once a month, like let's say it's vacuuming the hallway, which is not, you'd think it's not a big deal, but there's men in the building. I can't explain why some days I can't get up. I can't move. I can't be happy. All I could do is just cry.
It is absolutely critical for a woman who's being trafficked to be able to access some place where she can exit the trauma. When she's always looking behind her, when she's always worried about further trauma, she can never come back to zero. She can never feel that moment of safety that allows her to recalibrate, that allows her to say, okay, this is peace, this is safety. I can think about finding an exit.
I actually didn't fill out my first apartment application till I was 30. I remember going to get the key, and they gave me a keychain, and they were like, here. And they were like, you know, you understand you can go in there anytime you want, right? It was like so weird. I think I ran around the house and just like kissed the floor and kind of like went out the door and in the door a couple of times, like just listening to the key lock, you know? I had one plate and one cup because that's all I could afford, and a plant.
Getting to the other side requires such a leap of faith. You have to have in your mind some concept of what that other side is going to look like.
Honestly, that was the first time I had stability, ever. Ever. And the housing provided that. Because I didn't have to do anything or say anything right or do anything right or be nice to anyone to turn the key.
All right, so the lifestory.org kind of will take you through the different aspects of their lives, starting from childhood and going until it goes through school and work and housing. And this isn't to say let everybody live in your apartments, do your due diligence, but this gives you that example of how important what you guys do is. It gives a glimpse into how difficult the process can be, and kind of shows the idea that not every prostitution charge is really someone choosing to be a prostitute. There's oftentimes a bigger story than that. So in our line of work, the goal is not to rescue. We offer services, we work in training victims and help them get to being that survivor. Something to keep in mind, landlords sometimes solicit sex in exchange for rent. The implied threat is clear: provide sex or you and your family will be homeless. One survivor described it as trading physical autonomy for what is owed for that month's rent, and coercion in return for something of value is trafficking. So why we talk about that is because this is where we can hold each other accountable. You're living in those communities with each other. You hear something about someone, this is something that you can report. We've actually worked with a survivor. She finally was able to move and get in her own apartment. And the property manager stated that if she gave him a blowjob, he would reduce her rent. This not only is unethical and illegal, it serves to re-traumatize these women and men that have been in that. And she reported this to the board of that property, and they took the manager's side, even though she had evidence of what it was happening. So with that going on, you have, again, that re-traumatization, and the cycle continues for trying to get out of what you've been stuck in. You guys are in a unique position. You interact with a lot of people in the community, all from those that come in to do maintenance in your buildings to the people that are trying to rent your buildings or even purchase from you. So you can play that critical role in identifying or even just talking to someone and having a conversation, being that person that listens and that person that believes someone when they come to you. So what does this look like for you working with a victim within your community? We kind of went over some different policies. Again, when we do a needs assessment, I'm sure you've seen the hierarchy of needs at some point in your life. The basic one is physiological, and then it's safety. Well, what are the biggest things that you can provide with that? That's that housing. It provides safety for them, as well as a place of warmth, a place that they can go back to. So when we look at that, what does that mean in the trauma-informed care? When I learned about trauma-informed or victim-centered care, I think that it goes to every aspect of life, right? You're speaking to someone, you do not know where they have been or what their life has included or entailed. So it's understanding that they could have had a trauma experience. So one thing I like to focus on and want to point out to you is that instead of saying what's wrong with you in your head when you're talking to someone, think about what happened. What happened to you that has brought you here today that you've had that reaction? It's not about forcing someone to share that story. Again, it's just trying to understand that we all have that background and that sometimes our reactions are not purposeful. It's based on a past trauma that we have had. So with that, what it looks like when we do victim-centered care is at the center is that victim, and we're looking at building trust, reassuring that they have protection, remaining sensitive to power dynamics. They've always had someone that's been in control. So the reactions that are had sometimes by victims are not necessarily equal to what we think that reaction should be. And so it's understanding that some of these victims have lived in this lifestyle since they were 14. So think about someone when you're learning things from 14 to 18, a lot of life skills are learned, but when you're not in that life or you're living a very traumatized life, you're not able to learn that or those skills. An example that resonates with me and I like to share is there was a survivor that finally got a job. She was out of the life. She was ready to start over, start fresh, work on herself. And at her job, they wanted her to use a 3-hole punch. That's all she had to do is punch some holes in paperwork to put in a binder. And when she walked up to it, she did not have any idea how to use that punch. She looked at it. It was about ready to cause her to have a breakdown and cry. And she was ready to walk out and leave and just be done because she had no idea. Luckily, there was another survivor that knew what she was going through and said, you know what, let's do this together. I'm going to show you how to use it. So what we think are probably basic skills aren't always basic to everyone. Rati, do you have anything you would like to add to that?
Nothing so far. You are doing great. Thank you.
Thank you. So what does victim-centered housing look like? What does it look like that you can bring back to your community, to your organization? And it's being aware of the safety concerns in a housing vicinity. Do you have a lot of dark corners that people can hide in? And not necessarily that people will hide in, but places that cause fear. Being prompt with safety repairs for safety concerns. So if there is a broken lock, a broken door, if locks need to be changed. And something as simple as having overgrown shrubs near an entrance, if that's a place where someone can hide, that's a place where someone is going to be afraid when walking into their home. Again, these do not just apply to victims of trafficking, but can be victims of any kind of crime, such as sexual assault or stalking. So also being aware that that tenant may want a third party present, and it's not always bad practice for you yourself, instead of going by yourself, having someone come with you, just so that there is that reassurance that there's not one person that's overpowering. Do not show up at residence unannounced. Be aware of the language that you're using. You know, we all like to be called certain things, and we don't like to be called certain things. So having that understanding, you know, treat someone like a human. And when I say explain, this kind of goes along with that 3-hole punch. If you've not been living the same life, you don't always understand why policies exist. You don't understand why certain things need to be done. So just having that patience and that understanding to say, you know, we have this policy we have to follow. That is why we're coming in and checking your smoke detectors at this time. We just want to make sure that there's safety protocol and we have to follow state guidelines. Things to include in lease agreements is housing protections from housing discrimination, eviction, or punishments based on status or history as a victim of a crime. Understanding that the locks may need to be changed, and having that potential to break a lease without penalty if there's adequate documentation of a victim status. So if there's police reports that are made, there are protection orders. From a 2018 Polaris report, just understanding and protecting that survivor's right to call the police for emergency assistance, encouraging it if they need that emergency assistance, helping to uphold any and all protection orders. Those can be confusing documents. I've read them, but just having the understanding that those could be in place, and ensuring that there's complete confidentiality of all housing records and their documentation as a victim. On the flip side, some of those survivors did talk about like barriers. So barriers from their side of things, again, you've been traumatized since you're 14, you've been stuck in this position, you probably don't have a solid work history. You haven't had stable employment. You do not always have savings for a security deposit. Something that I think is really cool that we can offer is we help with reimbursement to different organizations if they're helping victims of human trafficking with that security deposit. We go through a little bit of a process, but we have helped with those. You're not going to have a credit history, or there will be a negative credit history. Some of that isn't that person's fault. Traffickers use their name, they use their documents, they can use their credit cards. And again, oftentimes the people we work with have criminal records. So if you're not aware, North Dakota courts, online, you can look and see someone's record. It's open, except juvenile, but you can see, and oftentimes people we work with have worked hard to not be involved with anything within years. They'll still have a record, but kind of understanding that when you've lived that life, you get stuck. you take the fall for that person that is your trafficker because you have that trauma bond. And it's not always that individual, but they love that person, or they're so under that person's control that they're taking the fall for them. So all of that falls under collaboration. I love that term. I believe in that term. We have to work together. I can't be in every small town in North Dakota. I love them. I'm from Ellendale. It's my favorite. Like, I love that we have our rural communities, but it takes everybody having their eyes open for a hidden crime. If you're not aware of it, you're not going to see it. If you're not looking to make sure that people are safe, you're not going to see it, because that trafficker can look like a boyfriend, a parent, a best friend. Where do we get referrals from? Everywhere. Law enforcement contact us, housing shelters contact us, word of mouth. I have had people reach out to me because they've called 30 different places and my information finally popped up for someone to talk to. We listen. We're here to help. Again, we do not expect you to be an expert. If you were an expert, you would have our position. So it's having your eyes open, acknowledging that something could be happening. If you ever have questions, we're going to give you our contact information. Rati explains things to me all the time when it comes to labor trafficking. And we get to discuss sex trafficking and also just that victim-centered approach. Always, 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 not just with trafficking. If there is an emergency, call 911. They are the experts to find out who to send to you. I used to work at a police department, and I cannot stress enough, if you ever think and wonder if it's an emergency, it more than likely is an emergency, call 911. If it's not an emergency, then you can call your local law enforcement, discuss to them. Also, this is our Slick line. We have our QR code. It's a place that you can report any suspicions of human trafficking. Our website, ndhttf.org, is a great place to look up. We have resources available. Also, if you are wanting literature or posters to post in your apartments or your locations, we have numerous posters that we can send out. Our website has some resources on it. If you ever have any basic questions, you can email us at that email address. That is where it's info@ndhttf.org. We respond, we answer questions. If you have requests for training for organizations, if we cannot do the training, we have partner organizations that we can suggest or help you get into contact with. Like I said, we have 3 different navigators. This is our information. Again, that's our QR code to go to our website. If you want further details, you can see our whole report from the last year on there that we give to the AG's office. My region goes over to Jamestown, and Beulah is included. I know kind of our rough lines and South Dakota border to Canada border. And then everything east of that is Jill, and everything west of that is Anna Lena. We're all available to answer questions. And then we have Rati. He covers our whole state for labor trafficking. He is brilliant. That's his email if you have any questions or want to reach out. Rati, did you want to speak to any of these resources?
Not much. These are just our website as the North Dakota Human Trafficking Task Force. That's the website, and then we have our hotline, and you also have the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is run by Polaris, the organization that we just talked about. They also offer a live chat. Is available. That number, you can call it 24/7 and get resources. We also have OTP line, which is also for hhs.gov OTP. So we also have the International Association of Chiefs of Police. They've got quite good resources where you can go and learn more about labor trafficking.
Wonderful. And then, of course, we keep our references on here. We're not just making this up. We've done our research. We've taken our classes as well. And we've had experience working with survivors and victims. All right. I think this is the point where Kylie, if anyone has asked questions in the chat, or if you have questions, right now is a great time to ask them. We still have some time left in our time slot. We love questions. They create opportunities for discussion. I do not consider any question off limits when it comes to this, because if you don't ask, you'll never know and you'll only insinuate. I don't also, like, if you don't know how to word it, just do your best and we'll try to interpret what you're asking.
So there are a few questions.
Okay, let me try to get out of this share screen situation.
How long has North Dakota had a Department for Human Trafficking?
I think I tried to answer that question on the chat, and I said, if somebody didn't hear that, well, we have the Department of Labor and Human Rights, not the Department of Human Trafficking. So the North Dakota Human Trafficking Task Force is not the Department of State. It is just a quasi non-profit organization which is funded federally and by state.
What age does the term child labor go to?
That is a very good question. For the federal, we have to look at the various legislations, and the international plane, we have to look at the definition of the child, which is anyone who is below the age of 18 is a child. But then when we look at the labor trafficking, that's why we say it is important for us to look at the local jurisdiction and the local laws. For North Dakota, for instance, anyone who is 14 and 15 is allowed to work as long as they have youth and employment certificate and age certificate, which can be acquired from the Department of Labor and Human Rights, Job Services, and they can provide those ones. So anyone of that age, 14 and 15, is allowed to work, but they have restrictions on the number of hours that they can work. For instance, during school days, they can only work a maximum of 3 hours, and that is per week. And then a maximum of 18, I mean a 3 per day and a maximum of 18 per week. So those are the kind of variations. So it is simply something that can be explained through the law. You cannot immediately say, okay, the child, because she's 16, because someone who is not the age of 16 is allowed to work in North Dakota, right? So what we need to prove in terms of labor trafficking, we have to prove that this person has been coerced or is being forced to work beyond the hours that they agreed to work, or is not being paid, things like that. We have to prove force, fraud, and coercion. So to answer your question, in terms of the age, let's look at the law, the legal age of majority for each state or for each jurisdiction. Federally, we talk of 18 because that is also the age that is spoken about by the department, by the international law in terms of the age of the child. Anyone below the age of 18.
If a family volunteers their 12-year-old to babysit for another family and the child does not get paid, but the family receives an item or food for that service, is that considered labor trafficking?
When you're looking at labor trafficking, we have to look at all circumstances. What scheme was used to get that child into it? Was the parent involved? If the parent was involved, does the child have employment authorization? Is that child authorized to work? Like we said, we look at the law. What does the law say? If the child does have age and employment certificate, yes. If that is allowed to work, we look at the circumstances. Was there any fraud or occasion that was used to get that child to work? Because we assume that child is no consent. But because of the law, which allows certain kids to work because of their ages, we look at all the circumstances. So really, it's a tricky question. A child can get a work certificate at age 12. Nope. A child at age 12 cannot get. In North Dakota, we say 14 and 15. Anyone below that age is not authorized.
Did you say the lady who finally got her own place was told by the property manager a blowjob makes cheaper rent and they did not believe her. Who did not believe her even with evidence? Was this brought to court?
So from this standpoint, it was brought to the board or the managers of that building. I was not directly involved with this per se. I was kind of the outsider listening in, but there was ample evidence that it happened, and they decided to take his side and have no repercussions. And something with victims or survivors of human trafficking, oftentimes taking things to law enforcement can be traumatizing, or not always, again, that trust with law enforcement. So it's not always about bringing things to court, or as easy as what we are like, well, we'll just take it to court, but it's that distrust or the trauma responses. I think there was an attempt to potentially take that to court or file a police report, but it didn't happen.
How do you guys handle secondhand trauma?
Yeah. So actually, our task force has a program called RST. We offer it to not only for us, but for service providers across the state, for law enforcement, for first responders, and it is trauma trained therapists. We have 12 free sessions a year, and it's all anonymous. Nobody knows if you choose to use that service or not. But we have telehealth for that or in person, and our therapists are trained in that trauma. Like, they're directly going to be helping with that secondhand trauma that we all experience it working with survivors. That's just something that happens, and being able to recognize that and doing a lot of self-care. Rati, do you have a different answer for that one?
That's a perfect answer for sure.
This is more of a comment, I think, or food for thought. Also wanted to mention that the tenants in the landlord trafficking examples can also file a housing discrimination complaint related to harassment, intimidation, or threats, and High Plains Fair Housing Center is happy to collaborate with you on that.
And just as well, North Dakota Department of Labor and Human Rights has got those services. If you feel that somebody has been discriminated against, they can file a complaint of discrimination, charge of discrimination against the landlord or the employer or whatever. Housing discrimination is also dealt with in the Department of Labor and Human Rights. They have resources for that.
Barbara, if you're still on, she said she has a question regarding a situation, but it was a bit long. She ran out of room to type before I got finished. So Barbara, if you want to unmute and just ask your question, you sure can, if that's easier. Are you still on, Barbara? If you want to unmute your microphone, you can definitely ask. Oh, here it comes. I am very glad to have this information. I had not heard of NDHTTF. I happened to call a friend of mine right when something of concern was happening to her. My friend had been working in exchange for a room at a local motel here in Jamestown. After she lost her apartment, she agreed to leave without an unlawful detainer. But before she was out, the property management company cleaned out her apartment and she lost everything with no court order, and is causing her problems in securing rental housing, even though she has a Section 8 voucher, but that's another story. Someone suggested she apply for a job at a local hotel here in Jamestown. I had met the owner of that motel, good looking, charismatic, nice, Harley, well-spoken, friendly business owner, perfect for my neighbor, Amy. And I told her she had to meet him. Anyhow, back to my friend.
I guess put her initials.
Oh, CR's story. Someone she knew worked there and told CR she should apply there because they needed a housekeeper. She got the job. The owner had her
come up, and he was going to show her, the way that they want the rooms cleaned. And then I guess I put the part about him, that I had met him, because I mean, I never would have suspected that this guy would, was anything but amazing. But so, and he offered her a blowjob, or he offered her $200 in exchange for a blowjob. And she said, she was trying to make light of it, like, and just get out and leave. And he said, and she's like, oh, well, I might be able to introduce you to somebody, but I'm not that girl. And then he blocked the door and wouldn't let her leave. And she finally got out of there, somehow, made quite a ruckus. And I called in the middle of it. But, and he said something about, you better not say anything. Right before that happened, he like all of a sudden said, oh, my daughter, something is missing from my safe. You stole it. This is after the blowjob conversation. And she just ended up getting out of there. And he said, you'll regret it if you leave. And she left her purse. She just got out of there and ran. And a month later, she got a call from the police department that her purse was turned in by this guy, and it had drug paraphernalia in it. And she said, I haven't seen that person over a month, and it's not mine. But anyhow, I understand that he's also, this is not the first incident. I know of at least 2, if not 3 others, 2 for sure. And I wasn't sure what to do. I called the Department of Labor, and they said it's not labor related, because I don't know why. But I'm just glad to know that there is some place, because I don't know, wouldn't that fall under the human trafficking kind of?
So depending on the situation, it could. It sounds more exploitation or harassment, not necessarily trafficking yet. I'm not a legal expert. I suggest, after having worked in a police department and have had situations and people coming in, when that happens, it's a good thing to report. Report it with a police officer. They may not be able to do anything about it right away, but if there are several reports being made and it continues to happen, there's a record of it, and they can eventually charge that person with something, because that's not right. That's if you're uncomfortable or your friend was uncomfortable, it's definitely something to report.
Yeah, well, she was, because he threatened her, she went to the police, that she'd regret it.
Yep, and having that threat happens. We're always, I know that I'm always open when we have people that question if there is something with human trafficking. You can definitely email me, and if it's not something that I can help with, that's when we can help find other services or get in contact with local law enforcement. With jurisdiction, when it is local law enforcement has to take that first report, and then that's when we can, our law enforcement partners with BCI, or the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, they can help step in, but that initial report has to be made with law enforcement.
Yeah. I guess, her concern was I suggested talking to an attorney and then having the attorney call the police, because she was concerned about this bogus theft charge he was throwing at her.
Right. Well, and if she knew that she didn't take anything and you're the one that's reporting it to the police, I can't say how that would turn out. This is going beyond my realm of possibilities. But I worked with some great officers and always going and talking to them and asking them, I mean, he's threatening her. That isn't right. So talking to a police officer would be good.
Yeah, well, she has now.
Oh, good. Good.
But, you know, she just didn't know because he's very charismatic. I mean, like I said, I thought it'd be great for my neighbor, Amy. I promised her I would never try to hook her up again.
Right. I don't do that anymore either. Not for that reason, but I just stay out of it. And I'm there for an ear to listen. I think someone asked why it wouldn't be labor trafficking or being involved. If he was saying, how would you, it's tied to labor, but not necessarily, it's definitely exploitation and could be reported to the Department of Labor. But if it's not something that they can investigate, Rati, do you know much more about that?
I must say, this is an issue of jurisdiction. The Department of Labor does not have jurisdiction over issues of labor trafficking. That's the State Department of Labor. If it was something that was reported to the Federal Department of Labor, then probably they would have jurisdiction over that because they have jurisdiction over labor trafficking. The State Department, North Dakota Department of Labor and Human Rights, does not have jurisdiction over anything to do with the labor trafficking. They have their jurisdiction over labor exploitation and issues of employment discrimination, wage and hour issues, but not things like that. So for me, it's an issue of jurisdiction. That's why they said it has nothing to do with the Department of Labor.
All right. Do we have any more questions today?
There was one. Is there any way that we could get the PowerPoint and contact information?
Yeah. Is it okay if I send it to you, Kylie? Are you able to send it out?
Yep, you can do that for sure.
Yeah, I will get it into a form that can be sent, and we can for sure get that shared. As well as I think you said this is being recorded, so
yeah, yep,
that can be available as well. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, thank you guys all again for attending today's session, and thank you, Rati and Sarah, for presenting great information. So with that, if you need a certificate of participation, please email Marilyn and she will get that taken care of. Next week for our training, we have personal safety / active shooter with North Dakota Safety Council. And that training will be from 1:30 to 3:30. So another a 2-hour training next week. So hope you guys can all join us. Again, if you need a certificate, please contact Marilyn. Thank you again for presenting, Sarah and Rati.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.